Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to Ms. Deb Rivera. Deb, it's yours.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar event. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today for this webinar on taking the guesswork out of MDAT. So my name is Deb Rivera, and I am your host for today's event. Today, our presenter will give you a guided tour of the Census Bureau's Microdata Access Tool, also known as MDAT, and show you how to create customized tables that are not available through data.census.gov. So I want to first thank my Census Bureau colleagues for joining me and helping to support our speaker today and for making this webinar possible. I'm going to be handing things off to our presenter in a few minutes, but I do have some housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. We would actually like to encourage participants to use the question and answer panel in WebEx to submit questions throughout the presentation. To submit your question, just make sure to select the All Panelists option from the drop-down menu, and that way all of our panelists can see your question. I will be using the chat panel to send helpful information like instructions, site URLs, and contact information. So again, for questions, please use the Q&A panel. Make sure to select the All Panelists option to submit your questions, and use the chat panel to find links and other helpful information. At the end of the webinar, we will take your questions through the WebEx audio line. For this portion of the webinar, we will ask participants to use the raise hand icon in WebEx to indicate to us that you do have a question, and you will then be allowed to come off mute to ask your question. Just remember when we call your name to please unmute yourself. A quick note on the question and answer session, we will focus on the platform data.census.gov/MDAT. We will not be able to go in depth to address questions on other 2020 census products, the data collection process, disclosure avoidance, or methodology. And just one more thing, we are recording the webinar today. All of these materials will be posted in the Census Academy site, and I will make sure to share that link in the chat as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and now I'll turn it over to Tyson Weister.
Great, thank you, Deb, and we are so glad that you all are spending your time here today with us. We are going to move forward with taking the guesswork out of the Microdata Access tool. As Deb mentioned, my name is Tyson Weister. I work on the communications team for the data.census.gov platform and API. For today, what we primarily have planned is a live demonstration showing you how to create custom tables from scratch using the Microdata Access tool. But before we get into that live demonstration, I did want to provide some basic information about what we're working with in Microdata, what its advantages of use are, when you would use that versus other data sources that are available, and then of course, your questions at the end. So to start off, what is public use microdata? This is where we take responses from our surveys. We remove personal information so that you can't identify any particular person or household. We put additional edits in place to protect the confidentiality of those responses. And then we give you that set of edited data for you to create your own custom tables. So the public use portion of this is referring to the fact that the data have been anonymized. Again, we strip all that personally identifiable information from the data first. We also put additional edits. Some examples are things like top coding and bottom coding. And then also public use refers to the fact that it's accessible for you. Today, we're going to be focusing on how to access these custom tables through data.census.gov/MDAT for Microdata Access tool. That tool is powered by a publicly accessible application programming interface for the same data. And then beyond those two sources, you're also able to download the information through the file transfer protocol or FTP sites throughout the Census Bureau. So we have the data as well as lots of documentation available for you. And then the microdata, of course, is referring to the fact that you're getting individual records that you have to tabulate in weight in order to make a table that represents the overall population. So we're going to talk on that piece here just briefly about the differences between tabulated data that you find in the pre-made tables versus this microdata that we're talking about today. So many of you maybe have used the primary data.census.gov website, performed searches, and pulled up data tables that look similar to what I'm showing on screen. We have over 5,000 pre-made tables available to you on our site. And in this, you're getting estimates or data that have been aggregated and tabulated for a specific geographic area. So here we're looking at a row of the data table that shows in 2019 in the state of Maryland, there were approximately 121,160 males who worked in computer and mathematical occupations. In microdata, what you're going to be getting are those individual records. So at the bottom of the screen, we're looking at an example of microdata. Again, this is a set of edited survey responses, and this is showing a response that corresponds to a male in Maryland who is a web developer. And we get this from the data by looking at ST or state code 24 for Maryland, sex code 1 for male, and OCP, occupation code 1031, which refers to web developer. So when you're accessing pre-made tables, there are statisticians at the Census Bureau who have designed the table layout. They've looked at all of the individual data, tabulated and weighted, and came up with this single number. That's an estimate representing the total population that lives in Maryland. When you're working with microdata, it's these individual responses that are powering the microdata. The nice thing about microdata access tool is the weighting and tabulation will happen for you automatically, and you don't have to learn any special statistical software or download the files and work with them on your own. You're able to create these custom tables directly on our site. But that's what's happening behind the scenes for your awareness. Also for data.census.gov, just to summarize some key points and differences here, the main website provides pre-tabulated tables. The tables provide an advantage that they give you more geographic detail, so you can get tables down to the census tract, block group, sometimes even the block level, but you get less detail in terms of the topic. Those data rows and columns in your table are predetermined in advance. The other benefit of accessing the data through the pre-made tables is that it gives you more precise data. So just as an example of this, these data are being powered by our internal files, so the actual set of full survey responses. In the case of the American Community Survey, the microdata file is made up of only about 60% of this survey responses. And again, those public use files have additional edits put in place to protect the confidentiality of respondents. All this to mean that you will get more accurate information. If there's a pre-made table, you should use it. If there's not a pre-made table that captures your data need, then you would create the custom table. The main advantage, again, being more topic detail for creating those custom tables, but you do have less geographic details. We're going to talk about the geographic limitations of microdata here in just a moment. Before we get there, I also wanted to note which surveys and programs are available through the microdata access tool. So primarily, it's the American Community Survey. It includes the 1 and 5 year data sets and is fully comprehensive in terms of what's currently available and historically available. We also have current population survey data sets. 2 of the most popular data sets are the annual social and economic supplement, as well as the basic monthly data set. In addition to that, there are a variety of topical supplements that you see here that are available for your use. And then also wanted to note, we are in the early stages of adding data from the Survey of Income and Program Participation, or SIP data set. And then to get the most accurate listing of all of the data sets that are available and up to date, you can visit the link in the lower left, and that will make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date information. As you can probably get a sense from this slide, we are adding new data sets and migrating data quite frequently. So depending on which survey or program you're working with, you'll see different geography options for you. For the American Community Survey, it goes down to the state level, as well as a geography called Public Use Microdata Area, or PUMA. We'll talk more about what PUMAs mean later on in the course. For the current population survey, you're primarily getting data down to the state level. There are a few selected counties that will appear in the CPS Annual Social and Economic Supplement, but they are not comprehensive of the US. And then for SIP, it also goes down to the state level. So with that background information, wanted to go ahead and move forward with creating a custom table and showing you how to do it. For today's webinar, we have two different examples planned for this live demonstration. The first one is going to introduce you to creating these custom tables. So I'm going to show you how to select the variables you need in geographies, how to limit the universe or the population that your table refers to, how to define the table layout and save your results. For this specific example, we're going to look at creating a custom table that shows sex by disability status, specifically for the population that does not have health insurance. We're going to focus this in Texas and use data from the Current Population Survey Annual Social and Economic Supplement. Now, before I ever create a custom table, mentioned earlier that the pre-made tables are easier. They have better geographic availability and they're more accurate. So I've done some research ahead of time and I found this is the closest table that provides data that hits on what I'm interested in. It's table H-01, health insurance coverage status and type of coverage by selected characteristics for all people. Notice that this table provides information for health insurance in the columns. It provides that data broken out by male and female here in the rows, but there's no additional indication of disability status. So in this case, I've consulted the pre-made tables and it doesn't have exactly what I'm looking for. So this would be a good use case to go ahead and create that custom table. To do so, you go to data.census.gov. We do recommend Google Chrome or Edge. On the landing page here, in the upper right, there's a tab called Apps. And this is a relatively new tab, so you may not have seen it before, but if you click Apps, it will show you all of the available applications that we've developed. So these are all data.census.gov apps that have a unique URL to get to them, but we've made it very seamless for you to access them through this pathway as well, so you don't have to necessarily remember those URLs. Right off the bat on the left, you'll see the app for microdata first and population pyramids, which we're not going to be talking about today, on the right. So I'll go ahead and click microdata. This will take you to the landing page for the microdata access tool. You can also get here directly by typing data.census.gov/MDAT into the URL. So we wanted to work with the current population survey, and the first prompts is to select the data set and year. So in this drop-down menu, once you click into it, you'll see all of those data sets that I showed on that one slide for you listed here. They are in alphabetical order, so you'll see them grouped together. Under CPS grouping, you'll see the first one is what we're looking for, the Annual Social and Economic Supplement. And then underneath, it will give you the available years. It always defaults you to the most recent year, but if you wanted to access historical data, it's available by changing the vintage. I'm going to leave it at the most recent 2023. And then we go ahead and click Next. So here wanted to point out a couple things before we get too far into the demonstration. I like to work my way across each of these tabs at the top. So starting with selecting my variables, moving to geographies, the data cart, etc. Also wanted to point out here, there are multiple scroll bars. So be very mindful. There's 3 different scroll bars that I'm seeing on my screen right now. Just be mindful of what you're currently clicked into where your mouse is and what you're scrolling if you're trying to make your way through the screen. Another tip that's very helpful is to adjust the zoom level for your browser. So I like to use the keyboard shortcut Control plus or Control minus in order to change the zoom. If you're ever seeing something that appears cut off on your screen, again, pay attention to your scroll and your zoom level. I'm going to zoom in so you can see my screen a little bit more clearly. And then the first thing is to select the variables. So we wanted sex, disability status for the population without health insurance. There are 702 variables listed here. So rather than scroll through this long list, I like to click into the label text box in the label column and type a single keyword. So first I'm going to type in, sex. And we get our first variable. A_sex is the variable name. The label is demographics, sex. It shows that there are 2 values for this variable. And before I make a selection, I always click the details link on the right-hand side of my screen, and it will show me specifically the values and data that I'm getting. So I'm very clear about that before I'm making any selections. This is going to provide me data for males and females. So this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'll go ahead and mark the checkbox to the left of a sex. And in the data cart, notice it has 1 in parentheses showing that I've added that variable. You can repeat this process to select as many variables as you're interested in. So clicking into the label box, I'm going to delete sex and type in my next keyword, disability. This will give me a match for any variable that has the word disability in the label. There's 19 of them. First, it starts giving data for variables to identify specific types of disability, which is a little more detailed than what I'm looking for. Information about disability benefits and income. And after reading through this carefully, I realized here that PRDISFLG, person disability flag, is what I'm looking for. And I found it again by clicking the details link on the right. So it gives value for not being part of the population that we measure disability for through this particular question. A value of 1, yes, means that the person does have a disability. A value of 2, no, meaning that they do not have a disability. So this means, by the way, that they have 1 or more of these disability conditions. So trouble hearing, seeing, remembering, etc. These are the variables that we saw at the top. So this is just summarizing disability in kind of that yes/no format. So I'm going to check the box to the left. Notice 2 in my data cart, and then my last variable was health insurance coverage. So deleting disability and typing in health. We see here there is a variable now _COV. When I click details, it says currently covered by health insurance coverage. Yes, currently covered. No, not currently covered. So I'm going to mark that checkbox to the left as well. So I have my 3 variables, health insurance, disability, and sex. Go ahead and click the Select Geographies tab at this point to move to the next step. If you didn't make a selection here, you would get data for the United States overall. But if we want to drill down to the state level like Texas, we would click State on the left and then mark the checkbox for Texas. Be mindful of your scrolls, but if you scroll down, you will see Texas as an option here indicating that you've made that selection. Moving on to our third step, we'll click Data Cart. This is your opportunity to review or make changes to your variables. So we have our 3 variables. yes, no for health insurance coverage, a yes, no disability, and male, female for sex. For my table, I'm only interested in people that do not have health insurance. So I don't really need to see data for people that do have health insurance. If you want to remove that category from your table completely, you can make that update by marking the checkboxes here. So once you've clicked into a variable on the left, here you see the orange bar for now for health insurance coverage. You can uncheck the box for yes. That will exclude people from your table that do have health insurance and only keep data for people that do not have health insurance. So sometimes it's a matter of preference if you want all of those details shown in your table, or if you just want to simplify things, you can make removals to your selections here. The next step is table layout. This is where you really customize the display of your table. So the main thing that I want to hone in on here, there's a few different options: columns and rows, and then there's not on table, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So actually, we'll start with the not on table. For your health insurance coverage, we only have one response. I don't need to see a value for no, currently covered by health insurance. No, I don't really need this label in my table. It just maybe is helpful. Maybe it clutters up the view for you. It's really a preference, but if you put it on not on table, you're still going to get the exact same data. It's just going to remove that label. And sometimes, depending on the order of the variables, those labels may be repeating throughout your table. So that's what not on table means, is that it still affects the population that your table represents, which is another way of saying may restrict the sample universe to people that do not have health insurance coverage, but it's not providing that label. Other than that, the decision for which variables appear in your columns versus your rows is just aesthetic. So I personally like to put the geographies in the columns of my table, since most of the pre-made tables that I'm familiar with on data.census.gov follow that structure. It just is my personal preference. And then I like to move the variables to the rows. So I'm going to move the sex variable to the row, as well as the disability variable. You just click, drag, and drop these. Can be a little tricky in this screen, but I'll show you another trick later on in the session today. And then again, within the rows, the order is just a matter of preference. So you see the update for what your table is going to look like on the right-hand side. All of your labels appear. Where there's question marks is where data will be filled in. The question marks, no matter how I have these ordered in the columns or rows, they're going to be filled in with the exact same data. Again, just different layout. So I'm happy with my selection here. I'm going to go ahead and click View Table. I like to review at the top. I'm getting data at the Current Population Survey Annual Social and Economic Supplement from the 2023 vintage. The system has already taken the appropriate weighting. So it shows the weights for selected variables and has automatically applied the relevant one. In this case, the variables all refer to information about people, so it's applied the person variable automatically. So we don't need to make any changes there. Scrolling down, we see the universe is restricted only to show data for Texas, and it's only showing data for people who do not have health insurance coverage. And then we get our data below. So we can see here in the state of Texas, there were an estimated, I'll zoom in here a little bit, estimated 5,024,341 people with a disability that did, that many people total that did not have health insurance coverage. And then there's a total of 2,652,000 males that did not have health insurance coverage in Texas, 2,371 females, that did not have health insurance coverage, and then the yes, no is the disability portion. So this number, the 109,835, is referring to the number of males who live in Texas that have a disability and do not have health insurance coverage. That estimate for the female population is even higher at 156,891. Now, once you've gone through the steps to get this far in your table, scrolling back at the top, you maybe want to save your results. There's a few different ways that you can do that. They're all accessible to you through the download and share button. So if you want the data in like a CSV file, maybe that you might open up in Excel, you can click download table view. The raw data would be the individual microdata records that powered the table we created. We'll take a look at those in just a moment separately. I'm going to leave it at the first selection and click download. Once you open up that file, it's going to give you something that looks very similar to what we just saw on screen. So the same numbers and layout of the data. Another way that you can save it is by capturing the URL. So you can click the copy bookmark link, or you can just grab it right here from your address bar. Once you share that out with a colleague or come to access it later, it's going to take you to that exact same table selection that we just viewed. And then there's two other options here. There's an API or application programming interface data for the microdata records, as well as the table. So the first one, if you were to run it for the GET query, it's called, these are the individual microdata records that were powering the estimates that we saw on the table that was created. And the API tabulate query is just going to give you the table data. Great, so moving on now to our next example. Before I dive into it, I wanted to give a little bit of background information about this geography called Public Use Microdata Area, or PUMAs. So these are statistical areas of about 100,000 people, maybe more, and they cover the entire country. They fit neatly within state boundaries. They're redefined after each decennial census. Census tracts in counties are the building blocks, and typically you can use them to identify most larger cities of 100,000 people or more and many metro areas, but not all. Now, before we talk on that point a little more closely, on the right-hand side of the screen, again, these areas are population-based. So when you're working in more densely populated areas, like the northeast of the US, you'll notice that PUMA boundaries are small because the population areas. But again, these areas are designed to capture roughly similar population numbers. So how does this work out with geographies you actually use normally? On the left-hand side, as an example, if you're working with the city of New Orleans, which also follows the boundaries of the county equivalent in that state, which is called Orleans Parish. Due to the population in that county equivalent, there are 3 PUMAs that neatly make up that county equivalent. So if you were to select and add the data for these 3 public use microdata areas, you would be getting data for the entire city or county equivalent. For less highly populated county or county equivalents, what you typically see is one PUMA will span multiple county equivalents. So on the right-hand side of the screen, we're seeing an example of this where PUMA 01900 covers 3 parishes in Louisiana: St. James, St. John the Baptist, and St. Charles Parish. So typically, in most cases, you'll see the PUMAs play out in 1 or 2 ways as described here. And that's the hardest part, is finding the ones that you need. Once you go to the microdata access tool, it's very seamless to make those selections. We're going to show you that here in just a moment. And if you'd like to learn more about understanding public use microdata areas, I did want to point out there is a webinar through Census Academy that we're planning to have on April 11th. Some of my colleagues in the data dissemination area and their partner as well. At any rate, registration for this webinar is open now, so you can register today for that April 11th webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern to learn more. But at this time, I want to show you how to go about creating a custom table for PUMAs. In this example, I'm going to look at poverty status by single year of age in Baltimore City PUMAs based on the American Community Survey. In this example, we're going to also show you how to categorize very detailed variables called continuous variables as well. So on data.census.gov, I'm going to click the Census Bureau logo in the upper left. Walk through the steps again. I'm going to click Apps in the upper right, and then Microdata. This takes us to data.census.gov/MDAT. For my data set, I'm going to use the ACS 5-year estimates public use microdata sample. And because we're accessing PUMA data, the 2022 has dual vintage PUMAs. It means some of the data is referenced according to the 2010 vintage of the PUMA, and the rest of the data is referenced according to the 2020 vintage of the PUMA. This means that you would not see PUMAs as a selectable geography on the site. So I'm going to rather use the 2021 ACS 5-year estimates public use microdata sample that all is tabulated against a single vintage of PUMA. So it's just for ease of access. Do know that this is only relevant to ACS 5-year. Our area is working on putting out some educational materials that will go into this in more detail, but it's beyond the scope of what we can cover in today's webinar. And the 2021 data is the next most recent vintage. So still pretty recent in terms of what's available for us to access. I'll go ahead and click Next in the lower right. And we're going to work our way through just like before by selecting our variables first. Now, I wanted to show two other ways to find variables. One on the left, where it says variable, if you know the exact code, you can type in, for instance, age P and make your selection this way. Under details, it shows age is provided for people under 1 year, as well as 1 to 99 years. That's a range referring to a continuous variable, and 99 years is top coded. It means if someone reported their age as 101 in filling out the survey, you would see that data as their age being 99. Again, that's done to protect confidentiality of respondents. So I'm going to go ahead and click that checkbox to select the variable. Anytime you've selected a continuous variable, you'll get a note in an orange banner at the top. It's just telling you that the site does not know by default what to do with this detailed range, and you're going to have to do some work in the data cart to tell the system how you want that to appear. So I'm going to delete age out, and I wanted poverty by single year of age. So the other way you can search for your variables, there's this filter by topic drop-down menu at the top. It provides words and phrases that should be easy to understand and familiar if you've used our site before on the main data.census.gov. I'll click here where it says poverty, and it takes me to the one variable that matches that selection. It's POV, P-I-P. It says income to poverty ratio. So this shows whether someone's income is below the poverty level would be 0 to 99. If someone's income was at or above poverty, their income to poverty ratio would be 100 plus. So it gives a few different ways of showing that data, a continuous range from 0 to 500 and a single bucket category for 501 or more. So we're going to work in our data cart to specify exactly what we want, but this gives us the information we're looking for. Again, a little more detailed than what we need, but we can click it, notice the continuous variable banner, and then move forward. So I have my age and my poverty variable. The next step is to click Select Geographies. There are two options, State and Public Use Microdata Area. I'm going to click Public Use Microdata Area, follow the prompts, choosing Maryland. And then these are ordered here. So I'll look for the grouping of Baltimore City and choose those 5 pumas that completely make up Baltimore City. On the top, we'll move to our third step, which is the data cart. Here I have those 2 variables, and I need to tell the system what to do with these ranges. So you see continuous variable by the orange banner, by the word to in the description, and anytime you see this slider, you also know that you've selected a continuous variable. When you see that, again, the system does not know what you want to do with it. You have to tell the system what you're looking to accomplish. So the way you do that is by clicking the button that says Create Custom Group at the top. And Create Custom Group is just a way of saying that you're creating a recode, or you're going to be determining the exact rows and columns, values, and categories in your table. So here it says Group Label. I'm going to type in below poverty. This is aesthetic, so this just means it's going to be what shows in the column or row of your table. You also need to, very important, assign the applicable values. So I mentioned earlier, anyone whose income to poverty ratio is below 100 would be in the category below poverty. So from here, we would check the box for below 501%, and then we would edit the upper range from 500% to 99%. So 0 to 99, and then click Save Group. And that will create the category. We see the label below poverty, as well as the values I assigned to it, 0 to 99. All of the other values that we have not assigned go into a bucket at the top called Not Elsewhere Classified, but you can continue to click Edit Group and create categories for those remaining values. So here in this next label, I'm going to type at or above poverty. And then I'm going to assign the values that are relevant. Anyone whose income is 100% or more of the poverty level is at or above poverty. So I'm going to check box 1 between 100 and 500, and box 3, 501% or more, and click Save Group. And then the last option, Not Elsewhere Classified, I'll click Edit Group. I'm going to type a label. You could type NA, or I'm going to type Not in Poverty Universe. Mark the NA value and click Save Group. So here we have the 3 values that we assigned: below poverty, at or above poverty, and not in poverty universe. I'm going to do the same thing for age P. So click on the left, the age P variable, you'll see the orange bar. Then we look for that Create Custom Group button. And we go through this process again. So first I'm going to start out with under 1 year. Oops. Then I'm going to mark the checkbox for under 1 year in order to assign that value, and click Save Group. So you can go through this process manually and do that for each single year of age to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up through 99. Probably wouldn't want to go through that one by one. There is another helpful group feature that allows you to make these groupings in bulk. It's called Auto Group. So once we click that Auto Group button, it will prompt us and ask us specifically what we're looking for. So this is saying that we want to start at age 1, end at age 99, and then what groups do you want? Do you want single year of age at 1? Do you want 5-year age increments? We're going to leave it at 1, which would give us single year of age, and click Auto Group. And rather than going through all those clicks individually, you can see the system has instantaneously created those options for us. Last thing I wanted to point out here, because we created custom groups or recodes, you'll see your 2 original variables, as well as 2 variables ending in RC1 for recode 1. These are the ones that you created specially. Next, I'm going to click View Table. Rather than doing the table layout from that tab, I actually like to do it from the View Table option. I just find it easier to click these ovals, drag them to where I want, and release those clicks. So I put my geography in the columns. Then I put my variables, the ones ending in RC1, in the rows. I review the information, ACS 5-year estimates 2021. Poverty and age are person variables, so the system's smart enough to automatically apply the person weight. And then the other thing you want to check is values in table cells. We don't want average age, we want the count. So the number of people in poverty and not in poverty across these different age groups. Anytime you've selected a continuous variable, the system will default to one of the averages. You typically want to change it to count. And then the universe restriction, it is limited to those 5 pumas in Baltimore City. So now we've made our custom table here. It's saying that there are an estimated 591,000 people across the total of these 5 individual pumas, or whatever 5 columns were in our table. Then we see the total below poverty, 115,794. Out of those in poverty, 1,622 were under the age of 1, 1,876 were age 1, and you can see that single year of age data here as you go through the table. Once you get through all the ages, it will then show you here the total data for people at or above poverty. All right, so we covered basic table creation, as well as looking at more advanced variables, those continuous variables that require creating custom groups. Also meant to mention here, before we create that table, we always look to see if there's a pre-made table. Notice this pre-made table only shows poverty broken out by age in 5-year increments, mostly going up to 10 years, which is not what we wanted. So that was a good use case to go ahead and create that custom table. As you're working with the microdata access tool, some limitations to keep in mind. We do not have the functionality on the site to calculate medians, margins of error. And if you want percentages, you need to calculate your totals and then find percentages on your own based on those totals. We do not have the ability to show data over time in a single view. We don't allow calculating an average over time across monthly CPS datasets. And you need to use the variables as is. You can't create new variables from existing variables. For instance, this includes not being able to apply inflation adjustment variables to dollar values. With that said, though, there's lots of benefits of the microdata access tool. It does allow you to create those custom tables that provide more topic detail. You can save and download your results easily. And then especially, you don't have to purchase or learn any complex statistical software. As you're working through the tool, you may have questions for us. You can reach us by shooting an email to census.data@census.gov. We also encourage you to tell us your feedback on how we can make the microdata access tool easier for you. So feel free to send us your data questions and feedback. You can find the same email by clicking the feedback link under the single search bar. We encourage you to sign up for email updates when you visit the link here on screen, or click the QR code and choose data.census.gov updates. This will subscribe you to our communications, including monthly newsletters highlighting the latest system enhancements, educational opportunities, and data releases. And hands-on practice. So we showed a live demonstration today to introduce you. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with slides showing each step I went through on the process. But if you like hands-on opportunities, we do have 5 workshops, and we offer these each month. They are free to join. They're online, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, and you'll have an opportunity to view more demonstrations, but also get individual exercises, time to work through it, and you'll come back together as a group with plenty of time for Q&A. So we do encourage you to check those out. There is one specifically on using the microdata access tool in data.census.gov, as well as 4 other topics that may be of interest. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deb as we look forward to opening up for your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Tyson. So in just a few moments here, we are going to begin our question and answer session, which is going to be live through the WebEx audio. So this is how we're going to do this. So we're going to open up the lines, ask you to use the raise hand icon that is located at the bottom of your WebEx screen, perhaps also next to your name. So we're going to ask you to use the raise hand icon. If you do have a question, we will then call your name to ask your question. You just have to unmute yourself on your end before you do that. So if you do have a question, we invite you to use the raise hand icon right now. And before we start opening up the lines, I'd actually like to invite you all to give us your thoughts on today's webinar through a post-webinar survey form. So the evaluation survey will appear in a browser automatically when you exit the webinar. If you do have any notes for us to help improve these webinars or other topics that you would like to see us cover in the future, please fill out the survey. We do look at every one of your responses. Now, if you have any questions remaining after our session concludes today, or if you would simply like to email us your question, please feel free to use any of the email inboxes listed here. If you are a member of the media, you may contact the Public Information Office at pio@census.gov. And for general questions on data.census.gov or for training requests, please reach out to the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. So with that, let's take a look and see if we have any questions. All right. All right. And can we please unmute Eric's line?
Have any instructions or resources for determining margins of errors for these data sets?
Yeah, I caught the tail end of your question. It sounds like you're asking about how to calculate margins of error, what documentation and resources we have for that. Is that correct?
He might have closed his line, Tyson.
Okay, that's okay. I will go ahead and move forward as if that were the question then, and afterwards,
I'll just resend it again.
Okay. So as we're doing that, yes, the American Community Survey has documentation for this if you're working with the ACS data set. And actually, I see a few other questions in the written Q&A that also can be answered here. So if you go to census.gov/ACS and then click on microdata on the left-hand side, this is going to get you to the data and the documentation. So I would then encourage that you check out, especially this link that says PUMS documentation. And then through this information, you will see details about calculating margins of error. I can't remember for sure which document it's in. I would highly encourage you to start with the user guide. And then if you had any additional questions after referencing that document and want to write us in, we can help assist you to the correct area. The documentation and user support area specifically for ACS PUMS is also ACSO for American Community Survey Office .users with an S at the end .support. So ACSO.users.support@census.gov. Again, you can also email us and we can connect you with them.
Great, thank you so much, Tyson and Eric, for your question. I did put in that ACS microdata link in the chat in case anyone is interested. All right, so let me take a look. It doesn't look like we have any other raised hands for questions, Tyson, but we did, some of those questions that we received through the chat were quite interesting. So I'd like to read out one or two of them for you. The first question reads, when I select a Puma area as a geography, Census only gives the quote long Puma name and does not include the Puma number. Sometimes I only have the Puma number, so it makes it very hard to find the right Puma geography. why are the PUMA numbers not also included?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for the information on that. We would consider that as feedback, so we'll log that and consider it as a possible future enhancement for data.census.gov/MDAT. One thing I can say about PUMAs and PUMA numbers, and I mentioned earlier how PUMAs change between each decennial census. You can have a PUMA number in one vintage, so the 2010 PUMA boundaries versus the 2020 PUMA boundaries. That number could refer to the same area between those years, more or less. That area could refer to somewhere completely different, maybe in the state, not even close or adjacent to the original area. So that is one thing to be careful about PUMA numbers is they don't typically stay necessarily consistent between those vintages. But with that said, one other thing that I'll mention here, and I'm going to take a moment just to click. So we have the names, as you mentioned, are spelled out here. I did want to mention I'm going to take a brief look at the URL. Sometimes I cross-reference the URL on the main data.census.gov website as I'm familiarizing myself with PUMA boundaries and what they represent in order to get that connection between the name and the code, as you mentioned. This URL is a little bit longer, but the components of the each click that you're making on the website and each selection and even the recode is why this particular variable is gotten so long, especially because we did single year of age, is reflected. So here's what I was looking for. The portion of the URL that is ampersand G equals. So let me get back to it. This ampersand G equals, these are the codes associated with each of the 5 public use microdata areas we selected. So 795 means it's the PUMA geographic level. 24 means the state of Maryland. We see that 5 times. And then the 5-digit codes after 24 are referring to the individual 5-digit PUMA codes. So we selected PUMA 00801, 00802, etc. You will see these characters added to the URL as you're clicking each one of those checkboxes. So we don't have it in the panel itself now, but I did just want to point that out to you, that you can cross-reference the URL both on the microdata access tool and on the main data.census.gov website if you're exploring, for instance, PUMAs through the filter or through our maps on that resource.
Great. Thank you, Tyson, and thank you for that question. Actually, we have a raised hand in the WebEx. Can we please unmute G. Davis?
Related to utilizing the API.
And I caught the tail end of that question. By the way, when we do unmute your line, it takes a moment for that to process.
Yeah, I was wondering where I would go to get some information related to utilizing the API. I was trying to pull the data directly into like Microsoft's Power BI or into an Azure data lake using the web API, and I'm having some difficulty. Is there someone that could assist me with that or point me in the right direction?
Yeah, I'll give you some resources to start with here on screen. And then also the contact information for the API is the same. It's us. So it's census.data@census.gov. If you're trying to get into the API, I recommend going to census.gov/developers. And I wanted to showcase just a couple of resources here. And they have improved this page. So under guidance at the top here, you'll see guidance for developers as well as the 2 user guides. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't checked out these user guides, if you're accessing data that's the equivalent of the pre-made tables on data.census.gov, you would simply use the Census Data API user guide. If you're trying to access the microdata API specifically, either those individual records or the custom tables we created, that would be the Census and Microdata API user guide. So there are 2 different guides depending on which data you're trying to access. And then there's all kinds of other helpful information here. You can see video tutorials, we have recorded webinars, and then I'm going to click here the guidance for developers too. It also provides you links to the user guide and some other helpful information that you'll see here on screen. So census.gov/developers, check out the guidance. And then if you still have questions, let us know by shooting us an email. We also have a community called the Developers Forum on Slack, where you can pose your questions to a broader audience of people like you.
Thank you, Tyson, and thank you for that question. We don't have any other questions queued up at the moment, Tyson.
Okay, I will go ahead and share some other resources here in case there's any other questions that come through. One is there is a dedicated resources page for microdata access materials. So when you visit the link in the upper left or the QR code, this will take you to a page with short videos, PDFs with step-by-step instructions, other recorded resources to help you learn more about using the microdata access tool. Again, if you have questions for using the tool, census.data@census.gov. And we also take training requests as well. So you can direct those training requests to us, especially if you're wanting training for a national organization. In addition to that, though, we have data dissemination specialists located throughout the country. There is a specialist in data assigned to your state specifically who lives more local to you, and they are available for trainings as well. This is a free resource. You can contact them at census.askdata@census.gov or 1-844-ASK-DATA. They cover all tools and topics at the Census Bureau and are a great resource for you. They've also partnered with us today in hosting this webinar for you. Any final things, Deb, before we start wrapping up? Any other questions?
Thank you, Tyson. No, at this time, we don't have anyone queued up for questions.
Great. Well, we wanted to thank you again so much for joining us today. And if you have any other questions that come up, please contact us, and we are waiting to help and to get your feedback. And we hope to see you again in a future webinar.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.